A really good honorable sentence would be something like, I want to have a healthier marriage, right? Who's going to argue with that? That sounds great. Super vague. What does that mean? Or I might even zoom in a little bit and say, I want to work on being a healthier husband. I want to be a better husband. What does that mean? How do I know if I did that today, right?
Welcome to the Blue Collar Millionaire Show. I am your host, Chad Hufford, and this is the podcast where we celebrate the unsung heroes of the working world. Each week, we dive into the incredible stories of honest, hardworking folks who have found financial success through grit, determination, and good old-fashioned elbow grease. So if you're ready to be inspired and learn how to turn your hard work into your own success story, you're in the right place. This is the Blue Collar Millionaire Show.
We are closing out 2025. So everyone had a wonderful Christmas and wishing everybody a happy new year. Logan, we're about to jump into 2026 and it's going to be a new year. It's a blank canvas.
Right.
And a lot of people are probably waiting until the beginning of the year to start making changes. And, you know, why make a change in your life now when you can just procrastinate a few days? Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it's obviously it's a thing people joke about, you know, New Year's resolutions and how they usually die by Valentine's Day and things like that. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think a lot of resolutions there's not much resolve there to begin with. And I just think of, like, you know, the difference, to me at least, the difference between a goal and a wish is a plan.
Right.
And a lot of times people really come up with wishes for the new year, not real goals, because there's no plan or strategy for achieving them. I mean, I wish to have a helicopter, but I have no plan in getting one or learning how to fly one. So I can't call that a goal because I'm not actively producing a strategy to acquire or learn how to fly said helicopter. So at the end of 2026, I'm probably not going to have a helicopter.
Yeah. And the low-hanging fruit would be, you know, somebody that might say something that sounds good and they don't even believe it for themselves. But I think there's a big middle ground of people that really do want to make healthy changes. They want to be better. They truly do have a desire and even a resolve, but they don't know what it looks like to put that plan into place. They might not have accountability. They don't know what it looks like to create something that's small and measurable, you know, to get them there. So yeah, what I wanted to spend some time talking about is like a few very real life type New Year's resolutions or goals that people might have that sound really good, really honorable, but they're not likely to ever hit because we'll get into it, but because they're vague and they're not really measurable.
Well, I think the other problem that people run into as well is a lot of times there is no way of holding oneself accountable to an action. And what I mean by that is we have a goal that's based on an outcome,
right,
rather than an input.
Right.
And that's fine. Like, I mean, we have business goals and things that we're not 100% control over, but especially in the financial industry, so much of the industry is focused on things that we can't control. Can't control interest rates, can't control what the economy is going to do, can't control whether there's a financial crash or war in the Middle East or tax changes. Like, all that stuff, yes, it matters, but we can't control any of that. And when we make goals based off things that are largely, at least somewhat, outside of our influence, it can create a place of learned helplessness. And I think that's why people give up on goals, because they set a goal that, like you said, wasn't very specific. It was too vague. It wasn't measurable, but they also couldn't leverage the outcome as much as they wanted to, and feeling that sense of helplessness very early on. So that's what we'll talk about today, is how to make goals that are specific, measurable, but also attaching them to some sort of an input that I can control, that you can control. Because we celebrate outcomes. We celebrate retirement. We celebrate, you know, getting a promotion, graduating, and all that. But we also need to learn to celebrate inputs. In order to graduate, I've got to study 2 hours a day, 3 times a week, or something like that. That's an input I can control. Sometimes that's going to make a huge impact. Sometimes it's not. But graduating in 4 years is a good goal, but I need to break that down to a plan of inputs to create a real strategy from that.
Yeah. And just really quickly, I mean, there's this visual that is outside of finances, but I mean, it's exactly what we're talking about to give folks a little peek behind the curtain before we dive into some that are about money, about finances. A really good honorable sentence would be something like, I want to have a healthier marriage, right? Who's going to argue with that? That sounds great. Super vague. What does that mean? Or I might even zoom in a little bit and say, I want to work on being a healthier husband. I want to be a better husband. What does that mean? How do I know if I did that today, right? And so if I were to really zoom in and make that tangible, I might say something like, I'm going to every day make coffee in the morning before my wife wakes up, right? That doesn't make my marriage healthier, but it is one very tangible thing that I can control that is a small stepping stone on the pathway of being a healthier husband, right? Or I could say, I'm going to, read 4 marriage books this year or something like that, right? And so but our brains as humans don't typically go super specific and tangible. It's easier to just stay in this kind of nebulous 30,000 foot view sometimes.
Yeah, but I don't, whether it's subconscious or not, I think some of that is to protect us in our own comfort zone.
Like from disappointment?
I think vagueness oftentimes gives us a little bit of distance from responsibility and acting.
Yeah.
And it cuts both ways too, because what you just said is, in not so many words, is you have to know what a win looks like.
Right.
So I want to have a healthier marriage. Yeah, that's so squishy and nebulous that there's really no way to hold myself accountable to that. But I'm gonna wake up 20 minutes early to make my wife breakfast 3 times a week.
Right.
That's something every single week I can tell if I'm winning.
And you can tell a friend, or your therapist or your accountability partner, like, hey, I did that every day this week, or I didn't do it, 2 days. And you can hold yourself, you can work on it.
And can you read 4 books on marriage and have a worse marriage a year from now than today?
Right.
Sure, absolutely.
Right.
But you can also have a plan to go out to eat 1 day a week less and put all that money towards debt.
Right.
And then at the end of the year, you get in a car accident and that debt all gets replaced.
Right.
Now that was outside of your control, but you counted the wins that, okay,
yep,
I went out to eat only 3 times this week instead of the usual 4, and I put that $80 towards paying off debt. This week was a win.
Yep.
I took a real step forward towards my goal. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about, right? About how to know what a victory looks like. Because that's a big part of this too. I mean, any major life change or resolution really has to come down to creating new habits. In order for those habits to be sustainable, we have to have a little bump in dopamine and a little boost in motivation throughout the way or throughout the trip towards that goal. And I think having some small victories and celebrating those victories along the way is really important. And if I don't know if I'm winning or not, just imagine watching a game you don't fully understand with no scoreboard. And that's how a lot of people play their lives. Right. They're not really sure what the rules are. There's certainly no scoreboard. And, it's like watching a sport that you've never seen before, which is going to be confusing enough. You take the scoreboard away, people are completely lost.
Right. But you can tell yourself, I think that I'm wanting to be this different sort of person, but yeah, I'm not accountable to it. So let's start with one that maybe is cut from a similar cloth to the, I want to be a better husband. I'm going to become more educated about investing, about finances. I'm going to become more educated this year. Sounds nice. Very vague.
Mm-hmm.
So what would be a way to make that tangible, to make that more of a new habit or a realistic goal rather than just an idea?
Well, first of all, I would actually preface this with a little bit of a warning that education without execution is merely entertainment. And what I mean by that is if I'm going to educate myself, I need to make sure that there's also some sort of plan for implementing and applying what I've learned. Now, it's one thing if you're going to educate yourself on 17th century Nepalese history, probably not a lot of tangible, actionable benefit from that. You might learn some cool things, and that's nice. But something like this, where it's a self-improvement type of education, there has to be an action plan.
Right.
So education without execution is merely entertainment. There's nothing wrong with entertaining yourself. You just have to be, you have to be honest with yourself.
Call it like it is.
Yeah. That I'm listening to these podcasts, or I'm reading this book, or I went to this seminar. I'm not going to really do anything about it, but it's cool to have the information.
Right.
So, there's so much that you could do, but kind of going back to what you said about the healthy marriage, might be reading 4 books. Some books that I would strongly recommend would be Simple Wealth, Inevitable Wealth by Nick Murray. Tremendous book. Morgan Housel has several books. The Art of Spending Money, The Psychology of Money, Things That Stay the Same, or something to the fact. I think that's his other book. Mark Mattson wrote a book called Main Street Money. There's a book called Forging Financial Freedom that's pretty decent, written by some guy named Chad. And those are all some really solid books. And maybe you pick 1 or 2 of them. If you've never read a book on finances, saying that you're going to read 1 a month, it might be too big of a chunk to bite off. We've got our tax seminar coming up here in just a few weeks on the 20th? January 20th. So, maybe attending an educational seminar, which we will provide some actionable steps coming out of that. But those are all ways to make that measurable. Say I'm going to, go to 2 conferences, or go to 2 seminars, or read 3 books, or Morgan Housel also has a great podcast. I'm going to listen to 1 financial podcast a month. Now, one caveat to that, I prefer things like books over podcasts, because podcasts can be very much in the moment. If you're trying to educate yourself in a way that actually makes a difference, the education should be timeless principles, not timely news. Now, I think in this podcast, we talk about a lot of principles. Morgan Housel's podcast, the same thing. But there's a lot of podcasts out there that aren't going to be relevant 2 years, or maybe not even 2 weeks after it's broadcast. And if you're listening to a podcast and you just think, if we were to listen to this thing 5 years ago, or 5 years from now, are these principles, these ideas, is it still relevant? Then it's probably a decent podcast. If not, it's probably not. It's not the type of education that you're looking for.
Yep. Okay. I like it. Another one, very on the nose. I want to invest more. I've been getting 3%. I've been putting 3% away to get my match. Nothing more than that. I want to invest more.
Okay. Well, kind of same thing on the book thing. If you've never read a financial book, and one that I didn't mention, because it is a little bit of a slog. It's a good book, but it's chewy, as Dave Ramsey would say. By the way, Dave Ramsey has a few good financial books too. But it's Jeremy Siegel's Stocks for the Long Run. Okay. I get bogged down in that book, and I love this stuff. So,
is this like if you want to nerd out kind of a book?
It's a little, there's some very practical stuff. It's chewier than some of the other books I mentioned. So, reading a book like that every month, if you've never read a financial, it's a tough place to start. Okay. Starting with one of Morgan Housel's books, or Nick Murray's book, is still super practical and full of wisdom, but it's an easy way to start. And saying I'm going to do one of those a month when I've never ever done one in my life, it's not super realistic. So if you're doing 3% a year and your goal is to be saving 10% of your income, make sure you take little baby steps. Okay. And just think about it like if you're a runner. If you've never run more than 3 miles, you want to do a half marathon, you're not going to go and run 10, 12, 13 miles tomorrow. You might run 3.5. Okay. So if you got some raises coming up, I'm going to put 50% of my February raise and my July bonus towards retirement. Like, that's a very measurable thing. Right.
When you've done it or whether you didn't do it.
Yep. And I would say, again, just go back to this. I'm saving 3%. I want it to be by X% by the end of the year. Let's say 6. Yeah. So then break that down incrementally. What do you need to look like in April in order to be on track? What do you look like on June to be on track? It also might be some other measurables here too, that I'm going to cut X line item from my budget by a certain percentage in order to put more in retirement. So there might be some other goals necessary.
We're getting there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, and let's go ahead and segue into that.
Okay.
So again, a very great ideal. I want to stop wasting money. I got to stop these impulse purchases, which that's actually a little bit more zoomed in than some people might say. They might not be aware of the impulse purchase, but let's assume that somebody is. I got to stop wasting money on impulse purchases. What's the habit that you got to create from that or to get there?
Okay, so we have to make it specific and measurable. So, if somebody has an idea of, maybe what that average cost is every month, maybe it's $200, maybe it's $500. I want it to go from X to Y by a certain time, and then reverse. So let's just say you're $500 a month you're spending on Amazon or eBay or wherever. There's no plan. It's totally reactive purchases. You want to get that from 500 to 200 by July. Okay. So now it's specific and measurable, but what are the inputs that I'm going to change to do that? So maybe I delete my credit cards from all my shopping apps.
So it's not saved on the phone.
Nope.
Yep.
So when I see something, I have to physically go get my card or memorize the card. But it adds a little bit of friction. Yep. It adds one more step. And it might not seem significant, but simply giving yourself a little bit of a hurdle to jump through slows down your brain just enough where the rational part is like, wait a minute, Chad. Nope, we don't really need that.
You're not running on autopilot.
You're not running on autopilot. And you have to do a little work before you make that impulse purchase. So I think that's a really, really effective one to make it inconvenient to do that. Just think of somebody dieting. It'd be the same as locking all your junk food in the safe. Yeah, you can still get to it if you really want to, but you have to go get the combo and do that and go downstairs and, or you just don't have it in the house. That's a little bit harder. With this example, you're probably not going to, close down your debit card account or something like that. But anything you can do to make that harder, or maybe there's even a penalty to it.
Right.
Maybe if you go above a certain limit every month, there's a penalty. You have to give maybe $100 to a charity that you hate, or to a political party that you can't stand, or you have to go mow your neighbor's yard that you don't like, or something. I don't know, make it up, but some sort of a consequence. And this is just, some of those are silly, but turning that into some sort of an input-based goal, though, where, man, it might be as simple as, in order to get to there, in order to cut down my impulse spending, I also have to cut down my screen time. I mean, that might be a way to
kill two giant birds with
exactly.
one stone.
But the more time you spend shopping online, the more time you're going to spending online. Like, so maybe you cut this thing off at the head and just spend less time even in that situation where you might be tempted.
Yeah. One thing I'll throw out there. This is actually something I have done. I've suggested to people to do. And you could apply this to lots of different areas, but let's say you struggle with credit card. A healthy accountability partner. Maybe it's your gym buddy. It's a therapist. It's, your really good friend, whatever. Set it up with them so that if you're trying not to use that credit card, if I use this credit card, I'm going to shoot you a text. I'm going to tell you exactly what I purchased. And hopefully there's going to be enough of I really don't want to tell that person. Like, I'm going to if I have to, but I don't want to have to tell them that I spent $80 on this goofy thing that I don't need, that I'm never going to use again. And that can be really, really impactful. It's looping in other people, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just me and my brain. There's somebody else who cares about me, who I know and I trust, and they can be part of that scenario.
Well, it's kind of like writing out your diet. Part of the practice isn't somebody else reviewing your diet and looking at it and saying, oh, you probably didn't need that 7th cheeseburger that day. But it's simply the act of, first of all, I'm taking the time to write all this stuff out, which reduces your impulse eating and reduces impulse buying in these circumstances. But then just knowing that somebody else is going to see this list, regardless of what it is. So yeah, that's a super powerful one.
Okay, so one this is a bigger one here, or I guess maybe a bigger picture. I want to leave a financial legacy for my kids. That sounds awesome. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that looks like.
Well, there's two ways to look at that. And one would kind of go back to your early question about being more financially literate, educating yourself financially. Because one way that you leave a financial legacy is training your kids. I want my kids to be able to better handle money in 2026. Again, way too squishy, way too nebulous. So what does that look like with some of the nuance taken out? It depends on the age of your kids. Maybe I'm going to read books. Maybe I'm going to sponsor my kid to go through financial peace. Or so I think part of leaving that legacy is actually training your kids to utilize that legacy so that money left is a blessing and not a burden.
Okay.
The way I look at it, at wealth is kind of like a weight, in a sense that if you're already strong, you take somebody that, that's been working out for a long time, you put a couple 100 pounds on their back and make them go up and down, that weight's going to make them stronger. You take somebody that's never lifted before, you put a couple 100 pounds on their back and have them squat or do lunges, and you could really hurt that person. It's the same weight. The weight's not the problem. Right. The weight is the injury or the hurt came from a lack of preparedness. So if your 27-year-old kid inherits $1 million, and they haven't been prepared, that the weight of that wealth can crush them. So part of that legacy is training up your children, adult or not. And so you can apply some of those educational principles to that as well. This is where real numbers are important. Now it's a little bit harder because, it's probably not going to be something by the end of the year. Hopefully you're not going to die this year, but okay, out of your nest egg, what percentage do you want to leave behind? Is there a dollar amount? Because with your financial plan, we can reverse engineer that. If you want to leave $500,000 to each of your 3 kids, we can figure out how that needs to look in your plan. But without any numbers attached to it, it's really hard to know what that looks like. The other part is, do you want, like, what sacrifices are you willing to make in order to make that a reality? And the more tangible that goal is, the easier it is to make sacrifices. I mean, kind of going back to what you said about, I want to save more, one thing I failed to mention is attaching that to the benefit. Saving without a plan can feel like a cost.
Right.
It's just more money coming out of my paycheck. Some goes to the federal government, some goes to this guy named FICA, and then some goes to this 401k.
Yeah.
That is for future, Chad, and that feels like a cost to me.
Right.
But if you have a financial goal with other realistic, measurable objectives, now I can see that I'm paying my future self. So going back to this is part of your long-term financial goal. It isn't just sacrifices that I'm making, because obviously in order to leave a legacy, then there's got to be less consumption on this end. But knowing I'm doing that for the benefit of my children or grandchildren, it ups the standard. It creates a little bit higher calling for how you're even living in retirement because of that goal.
Yeah. So along those similar lines, thinking forward, I've got a family. Somebody's going, okay, I know I'm not as prepared as I should be, or maybe I'm not prepared at all if something were to happen to me. And there's all kinds of ways we could take this, right? But if somebody has that type of thought process, and I'm sure there's lots of people listening that have that, and their goal is, I want to be more prepared if something happens. Well, how do you make that tangible?
Well, I mean, just thinking of what's some of the smallest things I could do to make it tangible.
Okay.
Spend 10, 15 minutes reviewing the beneficiaries on my accounts. Like, that's one way to get more prepared, and you might realize there might be something missing on there, especially if you have a mixed family or something like that. And you've got, an ex-spouse on one of your accounts, like, oh no, that's
like literally just going through and saying, is this still how I want it to be set up? Are these the names that I want?
It's a super easy step, and it doesn't take very long.
Okay.
And if you find issues, it doesn't take long to fix it.
Okay.
Adding, this is something, again, really can be very beneficial. You technically cannot add a beneficiary to bank accounts, but you can add a transfer on death designee.
Okay.
And what that does is it allows that to bypass probate. So it goes to a specific person rather than just going to your estate and then being divided out however your will or your trust dictates. But you don't have to have that money deeded to your trust or have a will explaining that. The transfer on death is something that you can add probably in a few minutes online.
Okay.
To prepare yourself. I get the two bigger things that I just touched on that we'll spend a little more time on are trust and will. Those are heavier lifts.
Right.
But and we are going to be doing some things in this new year here on that. That can be really intimidating. That's one of the things that we're trying to figure out how we can facilitate that more,
right.
Because it's very financially vulnerable. It's very life vulnerable. You know, you're sitting down with a stranger, and one of the things that we run into is there's an activation energy that needs to be overcome. So we're meeting with somebody, realize, okay, they do have some holes. They need some estate planning, and then we give them some names or we give them some ideas, and then we tell them to go implement that. And it's like they have to build up all that momentum again. So I think checking beneficiaries and adding transfer on death designations to bank accounts are two small but impactful ways to keep that momentum going, but ultimately getting to a place where you have at least a will, and for some people they might need a trust. In some of these goals, it's breaking these goals down to what is the next best action. You know, it might be very, very small. So, you know, a situation like this, it might be, well, I'm gonna find names of 3 attorneys to contact by such and such a date. And then I'm going to meet with at least one of those 3 attorneys by such and such a date. So maybe by the end of January, I'm going to come up with 3 names. I'm going to ask my friends, ask my financial advisor, give me 3 names. I'm going to meet with one of those people at least by March 1st. So the goal, I want to have a will in 2026, is broken down into much smaller bite-sized pieces that don't seem as overwhelming.
Yeah. Because it is wildly easy to fall into that trap of, if I can't do all the things that make up the final, you know, the final result is done. If I can't get there, then I just can't do it. I can't start it. And so making each step along the way tangible is huge.
So in having a will by the end of 2026, that is tangible, that is measurable.
Right.
But it is a heavy lift.
Right.
And that's why breaking it down. So our first goal was, I want to have a more prepared estate. Again, not specific enough.
Right.
You know, so we made it specific. So I'm going to update all my beneficiaries. I'm going to get a will, or going to get a trust, or whatever. But man, that second piece, that is intimidating. But yeah, I can research. I can find 3 or 4 names, and then I'm going to call one of those people, and then I'm going to meet with one of those people. And it may sound really simple, but you and I both know that if we try to wrap our heads around too big of a step, it's just easier to not take that step. The other part of it too is, if I tell myself I need to have a will by the end of 2026, man, January Chad doesn't have to worry about that. February Chad doesn't have to worry about that. And pretty soon, December Chad wakes up and he's like, whoa, we don't have a will yet.
Right.
But if I can give January and February and March Chad a job towards that,
right.
It divides the labor over all those months, all those different pieces and parts of me, to ultimately get to that place where by December, we've got a working will in place.
Yep. So as we wrap up, my question to you is this, and you haven't prepared for this, but you know, if you're coaching somebody who, this is not a new person that you have no idea where they're coming from. This is somebody you've been working with. You know, they're willing to do the work. They're willing to follow through. But like most people, it's not necessarily going to be super intuitive to figure out how to make super tangible goals and habits for everything. So if that person, they ask you, Chad, what are 3 habits that, I guess maybe let me rephrase it a little bit. For people like that, they're willing to do the work. What are 3 habits that almost anybody could start implementing that would be good, helpful habits that would make things more tangible? Or at least 1 or 2 habits like that.
You're talking about like general habits?
I'm gonna leave it general. Like they might be investment or financial specific, they might not be, but things that a lot of people don't tend to do, but they'd be really effective regular habits to start putting into place.
Well, we already kind of touched on one of them, and that would be putting some constraints on the time I spend on my phone.
Okay.
But also replacing that with another activity.
Right.
So whatever that thing is, that way I can, like you said, kill two birds with a stone. So, maybe I go to bed at 10 o'clock at night, and I normally am on my phone up until that, and I'm gonna turn that off, turn my phone off at 9:30. Maybe it's 9:45 at first, and I'm gonna spend that last 15 minutes. Maybe I'm reading. Maybe I'm hanging out with my kids. Maybe I'm going to spend that time talking to my wife. Maybe we can kill that bird too, having a healthy relationship. It doesn't matter. The point is, I can't just reduce that time. I've got to fill it with something else.
Right.
So that time has to be replaced. But I think almost everybody, by reducing and placing intentional restrictions around how much time they spend on their phone, it would probably save them money. It would save them productivity. It would probably save them some stress.
Yep.
And you could, let's just segue that into another one, is having more intentional sleep habits. It's been shown, numerous studies, that people, they stick to their diets better, they stick to their marriages better, they stick to their financial goals better when they are less emotional, have more clarity, and all that stuff is enhanced by better sleep. There's tons of studies that show sleep being a major contributing factor to a lot of other significant life changes. And when I say that, I'm not just talking about, getting more sleep, but more consistent sleep. So getting to bed at a more consistent time, getting up at a more consistent time. So this isn't getting 5 or 6 hours of sleep every week or every day, and then trying to sleep for 9 hours on the weekend. And it forces more intentionality. So, what are the inputs? Maybe this is, I'm going to stop eating by a certain time. So I'm not digesting food at 11:30 at night when I'm trying to go to sleep. I'm gonna dim the lights in my house at a certain time, so I don't have a bunch of bright light right before. There's so many very practical things that people can do to increase their sleep quality, their sleep consistency, and that's gonna have a ripple effect on everything else that you do. And I guess one more that I would strongly encourage would be to start your morning with some sort of positive routine before you look at your phone. That could be exercising, could be praying, could be reading your Bible. I do a gratitude list. It could be staring outside, sipping a cup of coffee, just reflecting on life. But doing something proactive and positive before you pick up your phone and start getting sucked in. So those are just 3 things that even if you spend only a few minutes a day on the first and third one, and even if you increase your sleep consistency by just a few minutes, I mean, all those things I think will have a significant impact and make any of these other types of goals we talked about more doable, because you're going to be more primed to accomplish the things you set out to do.
Kind of creates the substrate that you're building anything else off of. So awesome. Well, appreciate taking some time, and guys, start implementing these things. And as we talked about, come to educational events that we're going to have throughout the year. First one is January 20th to learn about upcoming changes with tax law. We're going to have several educational events throughout the year, and whatever support we can provide as you work on new habits, especially around finances, come talk to us and let us be a support in that area of your life.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Blue Collar Millionaire Show. We hope this episode has been inspiring and beneficial to you. If you want help on your journey to financial freedom, reach out to us at veritasalaska.com. We'd love to sit down over a cup of coffee with you, either here in our office or virtually, and get to know you and your needs. And though this podcast is free of charge, we do ask that you please do us 2 quick favors. If you enjoyed the episode, give our pod a great rating on iTunes or whatever podcast platform you use, and also give us a follow on Instagram. We hope you have a wonderful day filled with gratitude and intentionality. God bless.